First of all, thanks everybody for joining us either in person, and then I know we do have some folks that are joining us on Zoom, which is great. For those that don't know me, I'm Stacie Pawlicki. I'm the director of the Owen Center for Entrepreneurship. The Voices of Entrepreneurship speaker series is something that we started at the beginning of this academic year, and we did it specifically so that we could highlight and amplify voices within our entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so we've had speakers that are founders, we've had speakers that are leaders at startups, and we've had speakers that are similar to Brittani, who are on the funding side of entrepreneurship or venture capital. So I'm really excited to have Brittani with us, especially because she is an Owen grad from 2019.
4 years ago, yeah, and I actually started at Fintop. I just was thinking of this in the car on the car ride over. I had to start while I was still in school. So last week was my 4-year anniversary. I started right after spring break. We can get into why that is with venture hiring and everything, but yeah, 4 years last week.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. Your work anniversary. And so we really like to keep these conversations pretty informal. So we've got some questions we'll dive into, get a little bit more of Brittani's background, and then we'll pause for questions from the audience. So we want to make sure this is valuable for anybody that is joining us. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll make sure that we dive into them as much as we can. One other thing before we jump in, I'm going to read a little bit of your bio, which is always helpful to gauge a little bit about Brittani. So Brittani Roberts, she's an Owen 2019 alum, like I mentioned. While she was in grad school, she was the president of the Owen Venture and Entrepreneurship Club. I'm seeing,
Added the venture part because it was just the entrepreneurship club at the time.
Fun fact, there's a trivia question. And also vice chair of the Honor Council. After graduating, she joined Fintop Capital, an early stage venture capital firm that invests in B2B SaaS fintech companies. As a principal on the investment team, Brittani manages diligence, portfolio management, works closely with the leaders of the portfolio companies post-investment. And then prior to her MBA, Brittani found success as an enterprise sales and sales management professional at tech companies like Groupon and Olo. With that, I think jumping in, we always like to kick it off by saying if you could share a little bit about your journey to where you are now. So kind of your career from enterprise sales to Owen to now at Fintop, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, the funny part about my career is that I didn't intend to go into sales and I didn't intend to go into venture capital. Both were kind of happy accidents. I don't think anyone graduates undergrad hoping to start smiling and dialing and going into sales. I'm pretty sure that's like you're unemployed, you're a waitress, and it's your only job. That was my story. Anyway, so it turned out though that was the best thing that could have happened as you get past the whole smile and dial phase of sales and you get into enterprise sales. You're in a boardroom, you're talking budgets with executives, and you are more of a consultant than a salesperson, honestly. And as soon as I got my first paycheck, I learned to love sales. Commission's great. But by the time I did 7 years in enterprise sales, I had done sales management, and I was like, man, if I can do this for someone else, I'm going to go do this for myself. So I wanted to start a business. I've always been pretty entrepreneurial minded, and so I was like, but I like to hedge my bets. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go get an MBA. I'm going to use my classmates as free labor, and I'm going to graduate with a company and or an MBA. So win-win. Can't lose in this situation. And while I was here, Mario knows I like one of my first meetings with him is like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and I did. He's like, you don't want to do that. Why do you want to do that? But I did a couple pitch competitions. Obviously, was involved in OVEC and everything there was entrepreneurial in our program. And somewhere along the way, I met Joe and Jared at Fintop, and just through networking events, and they would come speak on panels like this and judge the fire starters and whatnot. And yeah, they convinced me to come to the dark side. I pretty much got hired at Valet after an event from Joe. That's how I guess hiring happens in venture capital, as far as my experience. Very network driven. No one's posting jobs for venture capital positions really. So yeah, but what I've come to find out is that we're still selling all the time. I don't know if you know how funds work, but like we have this $220 million fund. Well, we had to go get that money from somewhere. So we're selling to high net worths, we're selling to institutional LPs so that they can invest in our funds, so that we can invest in startups. So we're selling to raise a fund. We're selling on the phone, the companies that are pitching us, they're doing selling, but we also want them to choose our term sheet over someone else's. So selling then. And obviously during the exit process, oftentimes our partners are helping kind of guide those negotiations. So I feel like I certainly cannot get away from sales. I did not see the connection, and it's very much there.
Okay, so taking you back before we move on, so you said you were going to use your classmates as free labor. Do you remember, like, what was your business concept when you were at Owen that you were pitching in these pitch competitions?
Yeah, well, the one that I think that I liked the best that I didn't end up doing anything with was a wedding venue aggregator, like the Knot and Wedding Wire, except it would actually allow you to book a venue and all of your surrounding providers. You probably know this pain. It would let you pick all your vendors based on the date you find your venue. Still doesn't exist. We got to do this one day, guys.
Everybody, somebody here who is wanting to be a founder, take that and run with it. You will have lots of clients.
I can help you with the fintech game. We could do wedding payments. It'll be great. It'll be great.
Awesome. So, okay, so then kind of now being on the VC route, I know some people raised their hand saying that they would like to get on the funding side. Any advice you have for students or folks that are looking to transition into, you know, maybe a role at VC or getting on that side? What would be your advice for them?
Yeah, so you're probably so sick of hearing the N word, the network word in grad school, but it's very much the case. That's how hiring is done. And while you're in school, you guys have this awesome opportunity to do independent studies and to get credit for work with firms. We're actually working, Megan, I don't know if I'm going to say her last name, Andrek.
Oh yeah, Megan Andrek.
She's doing an independent study with us right now. I did one while I was in school with GrowthX. It's a great way to just learn, but also like when VCs are on a hiring cycle, they're going to just pull from who's top of mind, who's in their network. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the reason I had to start in March of my second year is because smaller funds typically only hire when they're raising their next fund. So we were just at that point where we had just finished deploying Fund 1, they were raising Fund 2, and it was kind of join now or don't talk to us for 3 years because we're not going to need to hire again for another 3 years. And if you don't know, that's typically the average cycle. Every 2 to 3 years, firms will raise a new fund and then deploy that. So one of my suggestions would probably be, since you guys all have access to PitchBook and things like that through the library, one of my suggestions would be to perhaps look at funds that maybe raised 2 years ago. Odds are they might need to go raise again in the next year, which means they might be thinking about hiring right now. Start networking with those firms.
That's a great idea. So walk us through, like, what does a typical day look like? I feel like venture capital specifically has this sort of aura around it. So, like, what's a day in the life like for Brittani?
Yeah, so I guess the best part about having joined Fintop in Fund 2 when I was just employee 7, and now we have 12, which is still small, but is I kind of feel like I'm in a startup because every day is different. We wear a lot of hats. We're a small team, but obviously a big part of that is deal flow and hearing investor pitches from companies, doing diligence on companies that we want to move forward with. That is typically a 60-day process. So we're doing customer interviews and a lot of team interviews, looking at models and things like that. Portfolio management for our existing companies that we've invested in, and if we're in a fundraising cycle, some fundraising and some investor relations as well. So a little of everything, but really our whole job is to add value to our portfolio companies. So in situations like COVID or the SVB collapse 2 weeks ago, we kind of pause everything that we're doing and take a census of our portfolio companies, get on the phone with the CEOs, make sure that they feel supported, and then we also do things on a more regular cadence, like an annual summit for them. But again, our success is dependent on their success, so it's really how can we support the portfolio companies.
And how many portfolio companies do you all have?
Okay. in the core Fintop 3 funds, it's, I think, 34 now, but we also have 2 joint venture funds, so it's like 43, I think. So a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had to run like, have you brought any of those in? Like, are there?
Well, when I joined at Fund 2, I was not the source of a lot of those deals, but I did the full diligence on all of them. So pretty much all 21 companies in Fund 2, I led diligence and closing because I was the new kid. I was the only one to do it on the team.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's kind of cool.
It was a great experience.
So what do you think is the most fulfilling part of being in your role right now?
I mean, to be kind of corny, we are dream enablers. Like every time we write a check, we are funding someone's dream. We are creating jobs. We get to celebrate in their success. Like this week, 2 of our CEOs sent us emails about big deals they closed. And like, I kind of missed that high closing deals myself. So it's good to hear from and share in that success with our portfolio companies. And, when they get to exit or even raise their next big round, like, well, on the exit side, like you're watching someone's whole life change. Like that's life-changing money for most founders if it's a meaningful outcome. So I don't know, just sharing in that success with them and feeling like we're changing their lives anyway. I'm not gonna say like, we're not doctors, we're not like saving lives, but in some way, creating jobs,
well, and
changing
economic
lives,
growth, right?
Sure,
especially if they're successful and get to hire and then those people, et cetera. So what's the most challenging part?
So this is a relationship business, and oftentimes we are in a longer term relationship with our founders than most US marriages. So that also comes with breakups. I would say breakups are probably just the most soul-crushing part. Like, someone's super excited about their business idea and you tell them their baby's ugly, but I try to be nicer, obviously, and give constructive criticism, but like, no one wants to be told no.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just not the right, thesis, like their company doesn't match our firm's thesis and it's just not a fit, and we'll try to be helpful elsewhere. But sometimes we also have to break up with a company that we've spent 2.5 months on diligence with, and then we decide to not do the deal, and that really stinks because they've kind of put their eggs in that basket. And sometimes we even have to break up with the CEO that we've invested in that we find out isn't really good as CEO, and maybe we have to replace that leader. And that, oh god, that one's the worst. I haven't had to directly have that conversation with a CEO, but talking to our partners that had, it's soul crushing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I feel like that's where also maybe that background in sales, like even though you're not selling, but you are used to having conversations and navigating body language.
Yeah, exactly.
So one question I feel like, and I've been asked this, and myself I thought this, was how much, and I know I've actually talked to you about this directly, but how much there's a preconceived notion that to get into venture capital, you have to be financially oriented, right? You've got to be that finance person, and obviously you had the business development background. What's your take on, kind of the best fit for a role in VC?
I think one of the most overlooked, let me be clear, yes, you need to know numbers and how to build a cap table model and a waterfall, and a big part of my job is looking at financial statements and understand what to look for in a balance sheet and a cash flow statement. And so pay attention in accounting, actually, more than corporate finance at early stage funds. But more than that, it's operating experience. But I'm also going to asterisk that with it depends what stage, what kind of fund you're at. I'm in an early stage fund, which means these partners or these founders are looking for a partner. They're not necessarily looking just for a check and someone who can build a pretty model on their exit scenarios. They want someone who's been there, knows the landmines that they're going to be standing on soon, and so if you have any operating experience and can help them relate and get through the road ahead, that is far more important than being able to do it discounted cash flow, because we do not look at those. But if you go into PE, way upstream, or maybe a growth equity firm, yes, that becomes more important. But early stage, they need a partner, someone with operating experience, and yes, sales is actually really important. Business development is important because those founders are usually the only salespeople that they have on the team at the time. And then when we come in, it's helping them think through building out a go-to-market strategy and who their sales hires need to be. So
Yeah, net growth. Yeah, that makes sense.
it's more of the art versus science in finance, I guess.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Well, let's pause. Let's see. Are there any questions with some of the stuff we've been talking about and some of the things that Brittany has said, or otherwise? Anybody got questions? I knew Brandon was gonna have it, but I was banking on it.
Hey Brittany, thanks for coming out.
Yeah, good to see you.
I don't know if you touched on this, came a little later, but with SVB, it was a
I knew there was
I
going to be
mean, literally, we had a pep call last week.
I was like, if anyone asked about SB.
yeah. So can you, I guess, talk about the impact that it's had on Fintop and your company's investments,
Yeah.
in addition to, because we're a little further away, being in Nashville. But
Yeah, well,
I'm sure it has a
you'd
ripple effect,
think, except weirdly, all of our banking was done at SVB, so for our fund specifically. So that was, it was a stressful couple of days. It was one of those situations where we kind of knew it was coming the week before, or earlier in the week, we started hearing rumblings, and we were like, is there actually a problem? And then their CEO had this webinar, which Jared on my team joined, and after that webinar, he lit the match that started the bank run. The CEO, there were problems in Silicon Valley, but he lit the match. So it was nerve-wracking for a time. Our money was there. We took a census of our portfolio companies. I think only 4 were only banking with SVB, so we didn't know how they were going to make payroll. We didn't know how we were going to make payroll. It was just a stressful weekend. But obviously Monday, government stepped in, ensured everyone's deposits would be there. So that's good. Everyone has started moving money out of Silicon Valley Bank and taking up the practice to bank with more than one bank, which is just prudent. And the downside here that we're going to see is Silicon Valley Bank was great because they were specialty bankers and they offered lines of credit to funds. The reason we would use a line of credit is kind of getting into mechanics here a little bit, but you know how I said we have this pool of investors that make up our fund? Well, every time we have a couple deals we want to do, we call capital. They don't write the checks up front and we sit on it. So we just called capital, and they have a month to pay us that capital so that we can invest in companies. Well, the line of credit comes in, and while we're waiting for all that money to come in, we can draw on the line of credit and we can fund companies. We don't know who else is going to be doing venture lines of credit anymore. So that is going to impact deal flow, but just investment activity. It's going to slow down investment activity across the country probably until some other banks step up and start. There are a few that have raised their hands, but it's such a different business model. We just don't know where that's going to land yet. So anyway, thanks for being the one that asked that.
Yes.
Specific to portfolio management, how does Fintop think about high or lack of high correlation to the market in VC and other investors and other funds? And if they do, how does Fintop think about that?
So the good news is, the broader market is going to impact our portfolio. We anticipate just before SVB happened, we're still looking at just rough economic times. Everyone is saying, recession, bigger recession, everyone's kind of just nervous, period. So we anticipate that some of our companies are going to be missing their numbers. So then the conversation goes into, okay, assume you close no more business this year, worst case scenario. Do you have enough cash to weather the storm? So we start going into cash management practices, and unfortunately a lot of times that is us advising that maybe they need to do reductions in force, and so that's another not exciting part of our job.
Yeah.
We create jobs and we maybe sometimes delete jobs so we know that in the last 2 years we've not been taking our companies to market. We've been kind of meaning we haven't been taking them to either go raise new rounds or to exit because multiples were down compared to the year prior. We don't know what this year's going to bring as far as multiples and M&A activity either. So right now, Joe, our managing partner, his whole line is like, live off the land. This is, you won't be able to get any more cash, and make sure this lasts through end of 23. So that's kind of where our heads are now. I don't know if that answered your question, but we are always thinking about kind of the broader economic impact of our portfolio.
Right, totally. I guess follow-up is just how many of other fintech VCs that you know of that maybe your founders are looking to gain capital from, and how correlated are they to taking money from other VCs, and how do you gauge that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when I keep talking about networking, a big part of our job is to also find the growth firms that'll invest in our companies next, right? So big part of my network. And the thing is, everyone still has capital to deploy. They have really big funds, billion-dollar funds, and they have to deploy it. So there is going to be capital out there. If we told our companies to go find it, they probably could. What we're more concerned about is at the right valuation. So everyone's a little valuation conscious, and we want to get, sometimes we're going to bridge our companies and give them a little more follow-on capital before they go raise a big growth round, because we want them to hit the next milestone so that they can get a reasonable valuation and not have everyone get really diluted when the growth capital comes in. So it's like I said, we haven't had a lot of new rounds last year. We only did one new growth round in our company called Pluto. So I think this year, maybe end of this year, we'll have more companies go to market, but everyone's kind of slowing down their pace. Even funds are, like, we're telling our companies to extend runway, even funds are thinking maybe we should extend our runway, slow down deal pace, and make sure we don't have to go raise another fund in 2024. So it'll all slow down a little bit.
Again, that sort of like art, right? You kind of are just navigating.
Mm-hmm. And these decisions change every quarter. We pivot on a dime, our strategy.
Which is kind of like a startup, right?
Exactly.
Peter, I think I saw you had a hand.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So you talked about the need to make personnel changes from time to time, which I certainly understand. But how about business model changes? How often do you get involved where you look at the business model?
Yeah.
And I'm certain that anytime you're going to invest, you'll make some adjustments.
Yeah.
But do you ever make radical adjustments to the business model, almost at a point where it's a new business? And if you do that, what process do you use to evaluate the market, the business, technology, the people? Is it something proprietary, or is it something that most of the rest of the world uses as well?
Yeah, so great question. And a lot of times, that's actually, I'm laughing because that just came up in diligence, and we chose to not do the deal because we want them to shift to more, they're more B2C. We wanted them to shift more B2B. They weren't willing to do that. And anyway, so it does happen often. More so, we have that conversation while we're in diligence. I can't really think of an example where we were in the deal and we had them do a complete pivot. What's more common is we have them try to narrow their scope. Good entrepreneurs are a little crazy, are dreamers, and want to do everything, and focus is one of the hardest problems. Just because your product can do something doesn't mean it should today.
Yeah.
Just because you can address these 10 use cases doesn't mean you should today. So our bigger, I guess more common scenario is they have 4 lines of business and we're like, let's divest or shut those down and put all of our resources and point all of our guns here, because that's where we think you'll scale the fastest. So that's more common for us. I'm sure other firms are more aggressive with pivots.
Yes.
Hi, so I run a business now, we're about 7 years in, and it's a consulting collective for human rights practitioners. So we're a social enterprise.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing about when we're seeking a partnership and capital, we don't really fit into a lot of the molds. And I'm coming to some of these conversations to say, is this where we fit?
Yeah.
But it's been a really interesting exercise also as an entrepreneur that needs to shift business model and probably pare down and do all the things. But the social impact component of what we do, we work with journalists and researchers and folks that are tackling really key crazy human rights issues, and so we're never gonna be a revenue machine. But then how do we, like, basically, can you talk a little bit about social impact investing? And I've been told, like, find the right angel. And I'm like, cool, magic money, like, into it, but, you know. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
So it's a good question and kind of brings up the point that like not every company is venture backable. It's just not the kind of returns that most funds are looking for, and that's okay because there are types of capital out there for your type of business. The unfortunate part, it's so hard to find it because it's usually in the form of like grants, or it's in the form of family offices or high net worths who just have a mission, like believe in this mission, and there's no website where you can go find all those. Like it is unfortunately just very network heavy. And Mara, I don't know if you have any advice for this, but like I don't know a lot of, let me take that back. There are some, I know there's a fund that we co-invest with, it's called Aligned Climate Capital, and they invested in the ESG investment we did. And so there are some that have that specific thesis. However, I don't know of any personally that invest if there's not some sort of tech component that can offer some sort of scale. But a lot of firms do like tech-enabled services,
Right.
and we invested in one that is local called Core 10 that was tech-enabled services. However, we did just we acquired a company so that there was a product component so that we could actually exit it at a higher multiple. So, yeah.
No, it's helpful.
It's hard. It's
It's an interesting landscape is kind of what I'm finding, so.
Yeah.
How broad is your scope when identifying companies to invest in and
Yeah.
potential follow-ups? How do you build that network?
Yeah. So it's fintech is super broad, and we have been known to attach a fintech label to things that are really fintech adjacent. Maybe it touches money somehow, so we call it fintech. I'm thinking of our local company, Fresh Tech, that is restaurant tech, truly, but we called it fintech because it collected payments. So sometimes we stretch. But anyway, it spans reg tech, insure tech. We would do prop tech, but for our thesis, it's more like, is it B2B, SaaS, scalable, and like, can we add value? So if we can't make introductions or add value in like the business model, like we're just not going to invest.
I think I was more getting at, like, do you invest abroad and stuff?
Oh,
like that?
abroad. Oh, I'm sorry.
I heard broad too.
I heard broad.
So that was not,
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, we do. A lot of our portfolio companies are in Canada. We have 2 in Israel, 1 in the UK, but Canadian companies have been fantastic because their government gives them a lot of non-dilutive capital. So R&D credits, we love it. Yeah, a lot of good talent.
How do you build that network with people who are abroad and not the easiest to reach all the time?
All of our international companies came from referrals from our existing portfolio founders. The Canadian fintech startup ecosystem, period, is pretty small. So most of the introductions we got in Canada were just because they talked to the people we've already invested in, and they said we're great partners, and so we got the deals, and it's all doing right by your founders, and hopefully that'll pay off. And we have our first founder that we exited and has come back, and we just invested in their second company.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That's
I mean
cool.
that's like goals. So
very neat.
yeah.
Any other? Oh, I see. Lots of questions.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is fantastic. We'll
Yeah.
just keep bouncing.
How do you usually source the deals? Like, are those like usually referrals, or like
Yeah.
you have a dedicated team that's like actually looking after?
We
what's-
are really bad at outbound deal sourcing. We have not, like knock on wood, we just have not had to yet. We have 7 partners, and all of them have built and sold their own fintech companies, and so they are just like lightning rods for deal flow. And so we get it from the partner networks, we get it from the growth funds. So you know how I said I talk to growth funds all the time and earlier stage funds than us? We share deal flow because a lot of times I'll look at deals that are too early for us or too big for us, and so we'll just kind of pass deals back and forth. And again, sometimes I pass not because it's not a good company, it's just not the right fit for our thesis. So we hand that off to another fund in our network, and it's just a reciprocity game, really. I try to be helpful so that other funds will be helpful and send me good deal flow. The other people that we get good deal flow from are investment bankers. They also want to make us happy, so they kind of send us deal flow so that when our companies exit, we'll go to them to run that process. So a little bribery, I guess.
Legal bribery.
Legal bribery, just kidding.
Yeah, in the back.
So how do you evaluate the founders that you come in contact with?
Great.
I imagine a
Yeah.
lot of these people, like you said, are very colorful.
Very, yeah.
I'm thinking someone like Elon Musk or even Jack Dorsey. They
Yeah.
don't really fit their typical account, but I guess CEO mold. So
Yeah.
how do you evaluate their skill set
Yeah.
or probability to be successful?
Yeah, great question, and we've made mistakes there, so like we have not figured it out completely. But we always try to spend time in person. In this digital age, during COVID, we made one investment that we only, where we only met the founder over Zoom, and lo and behold, it was a bad decision. But we spend a lot of time in person, go to the office, their office, see how they interact with their team, see how they interact at a dinner. We call people that they've worked for and have worked with before. We do a personal reference. We do, and on all these reference calls, we like coachable founders, so we don't expect any founder to be perfect when we invest. So when I'm doing these diligence calls on people that have worked with them, it's more like, so what are the weaknesses that we can look out for to coach them on? We don't expect them to just get glowing reviews. A lot of times, founders are control freaks and they need help delegating. They need help realizing that they need to surround themselves with people to fill their gaps. So more than checking all the boxes, we just want to know that they're coachable, and typically we get that. We'll ask some questions and offer some advice on business model or something and see how they react, but most of that's coming from reference calls and just watching their interactions with their team.
When you are evaluating a company, obviously a lot of experience between yourself and your partners working in software. When you look at a company, whether it's diligencing, the company, or once you've already invested and you're working with them, how much of that is leaning on kind of operational best practices that your team has through experience, and how much of that is catering to the funds upstream that want to look for X retention rate or Y, LTV over CAC or any of the metrics that get tossed around?
Yeah, so great question, and I guess the answer is that's exactly how we look at. The whole point of our investment is to have them graduate in some capacity, and whether that's graduating to a next round or an exit, like that is all we are thinking about. So if churn numbers are high, that's the exact conversation we're having. Like, your next investor is going to want to know why your churn is too high, why your gross margins are too low, why this, why that, and like that's the whole conversation we have in the boardroom. Is we're thinking exactly for that next buyer or the next investor. But a lot of that is just good business practice anyway. Like the partner's operational experience also reflects what the market is going to be looking for as we help them graduate.
I guess to go off that, how has that changed as multiples have kind of compressed the past 2 years now?
Yeah.
Has your approach shifted in that regard?
It's a good question, and one of the things that you may read more about is cash burn versus profitability and getting to break even sooner. Like that has been a big shift, because you used to be able to raise $100 million no problem from anyone out west, but even the West Coast VCs are now wanting more capital efficient founders, which used to be our thing. So now feel a little cheated, but yeah, certainly the whole growth at any cost mantra is no longer.
Being a locally operated fund here in Nashville, how do you feel, what's the pulse on the city in the direction of founders and new ideas and businesses being born outside of the
Yeah.
key VC markets?
I love being in Nashville at this time because I think we're still in early innings, but every year since when did I get 7 years ago I got here, like it has changed so much even since then. And one of the things that, like, there's no shortage of healthcare startups and a lot of music tech, but thankfully companies like Alliance Bernstein and Raymond James coming to Nashville will attract more fintechs coming to Nashville too if their potential customers are here, right? So all of this is just going to help the startup ecosystem as Nashville brings more companies like Oracle and Amazon and again, all the big name companies. The other thing that we're doing that I should plug is, so we are partnering with the Entrepreneur Center, and we got a grant from Launch Tennessee to start a fintech accelerator. And so the Entrepreneur Center has done accelerators, I think like Project Healthcare before.
Music.
Yeah. And so now we're taking their playbook and adding our fintech expertise. And so we're the kickoff for that is going to be this month informally. We're going to start getting applications for that in June. So hopefully getting a cohort of 10 to 15 fintech companies coming to Nashville and make them fall in love and hopefully like keep their businesses here. I don't think we want to aspire to be Silicon Valley. I think if anything, maybe we could, shoot for Austin. But I think we are certainly on that path.
What advice do you have for, we have student founders obviously here, I think who would want to stay in Nashville. Like what advice do you have maybe related to capital, but also just in general? Like what is the most attractive things in your mind if you are a founder that's looking to get to the stage of raising capital? What are things that, what advice would you have for them or things that they should be paying special attention to?
Yeah, so just one note on like the VC ecosystem here. One of the things that happened during COVID was a lot of people from West Coast firms moved here because they wanted to raise families here or whatever. So I go to these VC networking events where we all are going to get drinks, and there are people from Andreessen Horowitz, Manhattan Venture Partners, and they all live here now, but their funds aren't here. And so it's really hard as an entrepreneur, like you might be looking like Nashville VCs. They're not going to show up on that Google search. And so we can do better as a community at like connecting the people who are here representing those funds with the startups in town. So not an answer, something we all need to work on because it's hard to navigate that and find the money, just admittedly. As far as like how you should get ready to raise money, being able to show some sort of traction. It doesn't have to be revenue. There are firms that invest in pre-revenue companies. If you can show a significant amount of freemium users that are actually active users, or my biggest pet peeve when I'm judging any of the pitch competitions here is like, and we did customer discovery and 10 people told us that they wanted this. It's like, add like 3 zeros to that, and that's actual like traction that maybe someone could buy, that you're solving a real problem. So just being able to point to some sort of traction, even if it isn't revenue, and make sure it's focused traction. Again, these 5,000 people said they have the exact same problem, and I know how to solve it. Oh, well, that's totally backable.
Yeah. Also, too, and it'd be interesting to get your take, focusing on, getting customers if you can, right? Because there's less money that you need to be invested in.
Your early customers will take a chance on you. One of the biggest mistakes I think a founder can make is like waiting to go to market until their product is perfect.
Yeah.
Your early customers will accept that your product is half-baked if you're solving a real problem. Like if that problem is so painful, they will jump in that boat with you and help you row and help you navigate and help you figure out which features to build next. So I think a mistake you can make is like holding things too close to the vest, thinking your idea is so unique that you need everyone to sign NDAs and you don't want, you want to keep everything under wraps. Like, absolutely not.
Yes.
There are very few new ideas. Big asterisk there. Like, obviously there are some that are super unique and you should keep close to the vest. But like the majority of new businesses, they are a new version of something that's already working,
Yep.
which is great, but it's not the best product that wins, it's the best execution. And so if you're not out there preaching your product and networking with people that can help you and finding those early customers, you are doing it wrong.
Right, or how you package it and this customer service component and all the different pieces
Yes.
that make your product unique,
Yes.
your idea unique, if
There
you
are a
will.
lot of ways to solve the same problem. One of the reasons we don't sign NDAs at our firm, and you should never ask a VC to sign an NDA, is because in any given week, I get 3 decks of companies trying to do the same thing, solve the same problem. And it might match a thesis that we want to invest in, and so we'll pick one of them, if we've invested in a company and someone's sending us a competitive deck, and I'll always be like, just FYI, check out this on our portfolio, might be competitive.
I know you did that for one of our students
Yes,
who
exactly.
has gotten great success, but
yeah, it's a common, I think it just shows being a naive founder if you start slinging NDAs because you think your idea is super unique.
yeah. What other questions? Yeah, Mario.
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
Really?
please.
So, I appreciate you saying this about, there's a lot of investors and there's a lot of funds who are in Nashville. They're not necessarily headquartered here.
Yeah.
So my buddy just closed a $50 million round. He's president of a retail media company out of LA, but he's been here for like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so the networking component is important. Of like, we got to do a better job of connecting all these people.
Yeah.
So while the company might say LA, they're living in Nashville.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
But my question is, when he texted me this morning, he's like, hey, you're so right. A lot of this shit you don't learn in business school.
Yeah,
So
I wasn't gonna, the dean left. I wasn't gonna say anything, but yeah.
So what is that shit that we should be teaching?
That is a fantastic question.
Oh man, that's a tough
Well, how
one.
do we create these opportunities for students to live in the moment and actually try to learn?
You have to go out and actually work with business. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way you learn.
I was gonna say,
Experience.
100%. I told Joe, our managing partner, I learned more in like 3 weeks on the job than 2 years at the MBA program because you're just in it doing it. And again, I would say because these students have the independent study option, like go work at a startup and offer free work and get school credit for it. Like, why would you not do that and take advantage of your .edu email, because so many people are gonna give you the time because you're a student. So that certainly. I would say one of the things as a VC that was helpful here, what is it, entrepreneurial finance class?
Yep.
Yeah, so, they help you build a cap table and think through financing. Maybe as a step further, go find a startup that has a real cap table and model, because it looks very, like Megan, the student that's working with us now, she's like, yeah, this looks very different when it's downloaded from Carta versus like just an academic exercise. So like, just take what you're learning and then go find a startup at the EC or anywhere that might need some help modeling or thinking through things. They'd love free thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mario, it's a great question. I think real experience is the only way to get it.
And that's interesting too, because I think one of the biggest things, we had a pitch competition yesterday, and one of the biggest judges' feedback was, yeah, your break-even point, like you're being way too aggressive. And even the ones that are saying conservative, you're still being too aggressive. And so
every time
there's there's clearly a disconnect right there in terms of what's being taught in reality.
Yeah, the academic, launching the venture was my favorite class by far. Launching the venture 1 and 2, so awesome. And then I got into the real world and I realized no investor actually expects you to break even after your first $1 million in financing. So, a lot of what we teach isn't very practical. It's just an academic exercise. So I don't know how you change that.
I think getting the experience, I think, is a big one. I also think getting perspective from
Yeah.
people who have done it. So like part of what I think is so valuable when we do pitch competitions and we have judges that volunteer their time is those judges have done it, and so they're able to point out.
Yeah.
So I would say too, if you are building your pitch deck, before presenting it to any kind of potential investor, whoever you're presenting it to, ask or try to find a mentor and advisor who will actually walk through and be like, okay, is this realistic? Like, what would what is your experience?
Yeah.
Because I think that's tremendously helpful.
But also remember that in business school, you're learning a lot of important tools.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Tools are things that you're going to need. So I mean, the answer is you need all those things.
You do,
All of them.
absolutely.
Experience, but you need the tools you learn in business school as well.
Yep,
And the emotional intelligence on top.
absolutely.
The
Yeah.
soft skills as well.
Yeah, I was very,
The emotional intelligence and the soft skills. Yeah, you need those too.
yeah, I was shocked at how much accounting came back into play.
There you go. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. So any other questions from anybody? Yes.
Going back to deploying capital internationally, I'm assuming there's higher risk with that, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of, like how much higher of a return are you guys looking for when an international project comes to you?
We've never actually thought about it as far as returns.
Yeah.
It's more, when we're evaluating these international, like Canada, easy to get to. When we go across the pond, harder to get to, like if they're, like, I will say, I don't know that we will make any more investments in Israel if there is not a US headquarters. Because when our companies start going through trouble, like one of our only zero in Fund 2 is one of our Tel Aviv companies. They were really early stage, like earlier than we normally invest, and we couldn't like fly over there every week and like meet with them and help them through, like we just felt the distance. And so I do think because of that, we will take fewer risks abroad because we want to be able to be in the war room with our partners if they're going through trouble. And unfortunately, that's when we chose to not follow on, and ultimately they had to wind up the company. But two of my partners are right now in New York meeting with another company that is based in the UK. We found that was the middle meeting ground, so we're meeting in person and making introductions to US, their legal tech, making introductions to US law firms so that they can be in the room and listen to the pitch and see if it resonates here. So we're just taking a few extra steps just to make sure that we're not missing something. But we don't think about it. Our thesis is like every investment we make, we want to hit like 3 to 4x returns on each deal. Like we're not very Silicon Valley where like we hope one of our 20 portfolio companies becomes Uber. We hope we only have 0, and the rest are going to be 3 to 4x returns pretty consistently.
So you wouldn't bump international up to like 5, 6, 7, that it would need to...
No, we haven't thought about it that way. No.
Yes.
Just building off that, how do you think about, since you are such a small team, and you have such an active role with your investments,
Yeah.
how do you think about check size with respect to distance, with respect to meeting your funds and your call capital? Like, how do you think about all those things, balancing that?
Yeah, great question. So when we raised Fund 3, it was, so our last fund was 126 million. Fund 3 that we're deploying now is 220. With that, because our team is only 7 partners, and now I'm getting board seats because of bandwidth, we do need to make sure that we're not writing $1 million checks, or else we're going to have 200 portfolio companies. So we do write slightly bigger check size because we know that we're going to spend a lot of time with them. We want to make sure that we have meaningful ownership. So we're targeting 15 to 20% ownership after the first check, so that it's worth our partners' time to actually spend with that company. I wouldn't say there's really a difference internationally or not. Like we look at maybe that's a flaw in our system, but we've looked at every company pretty much through the same lens. And we always do reserve follow-on capital, but before we write that second check, we always do a second round of light diligence to make sure that it's still an investment we'd make today. the Israeli example, like we chose not to, and that's something, I mean, we always look at every second check as if it's our first check and like look at the business fresh. But yeah, our first checks now, instead of like 3 to 4 million from our last fund, now it's like 4 to 6 million first check, because when you're deploying a bigger fund, you have to write bigger checks. You have to make sure that you have the bandwidth across the team if we're going to take board seats on all these companies.
Awesome. Any other last question? Yes.
Do you help companies develop their team?
We do. Well, develop how? We don't train, but we do.
Getting people that in the right place for the development of the companies.
Yes.
Like hiring.
That is like the whole point of our first 90-day plan, big part of diligence, making sure and we do not go into every deal like thinking we're gonna let people go or whatever. Like, we want to keep the team and make sure they're in the right roles and then figure out which roles we need to fill. And I am so impressed every day by our partners' ability to just like pull a CRO out of thin air because they worked with them 10 years ago at a company. Like, that is one of Fintop's biggest strengths, is that we can help fill those roles, find new
The
leadership.
network.
Yeah, I never realized how important. I think a VC is only as good as their network, is what I've
100%.
learned since I've been here.
Especially in those
Like,
early stages where every single role is so
Yeah.
critical
Yeah.
to the success and how fast you can get there.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And there are some we'll go into some investments where there's someone who currently holds a CRO title, and we realize they are not a CRO, and we offer them maybe a VP of sales title so we can hire a CRO. It's not easy conversations, but yeah, we have to look at all of that.
How has the new diffusion of our workforce affected you? What do you think? Maybe
You know,
people
there's
don't
a
know in
heated
office.
debate in our office about that. A very heated debate. Anyway, okay, so the good news of remote work is that you can hire from across the country. We have people in the middle of West Virginia that are working, like talent pools everywhere that you can pull from that are, more affordable. And that was really important in the last 2 years when the job markets were really competitive. In a year like this, when everyone's going through layoffs, less important. But I think what we witnessed was, if your company is going through a challenging time, it is really hard to have a war room mentality if you're all on Zoom and not in the same room and feeding off everyone's energy. And we have one company I'm thinking of specifically that we don't know if they'll make it, and they are fully remote, and I think their chances would be so much greater if they were all in the same room, feeding off each other's energies, getting on the phone, that energy is missing in a lot of companies these days. I think the stage and I guess status of your company matters, and as does the stage of your employee. If you're fresh out of college and you've never worked in an office and you just don't know how to interact with adults, it's really hard to start your first job remote. You should be in an office. There are other people who have maybe earned the right to be remote or can handle it, but yeah, it's a very heated debate in our office.
I remember hearing Joe at our
Yeah.
conference, and
Yeah.
he was like, no remote work.
Everyone in the office, yeah.
That makes sense. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Brittany, thank you
Yeah.
tremendously for carving out time in your day to come here.
You bet.
And lots of really great questions. It was nice to not have to do that much talking because you guys had such great
Yeah,
questions.
thank you.
So
Appreciate it.
thank you so much. And yeah.
All right.